The gentleman I'm going to introduce to you is the interviewer. He'll introduce you to the interviewee because this is the celebrity interview. Ed Bicknell he's done a lot of things. He's promoted bands like the Moody Blues and Pink Floyd and Fairport Convention. Peter Grant, ladies and gentlemen. He's also done a lot of other things too, which we will not talk about because they are still pending in court. But the one thing he is really famous for is handling the superstardom of Dire Straits, which he continues to do until this day. And he will introduce to you and interview throughout the day one of the superstar lawyers of all time, Mr. Alan Grubman. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Bicknell.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I have to do what roadies do. Testing. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Testing.
Can everybody hear us all right? You're all warm enough? Right, well, good afternoon and welcome.
Ed, there's not enough light in here.
It's like my room. People keep coming into my room to wash their hands.
They put you in a men's room.
Welcome to the first of 2 celebrity interviews I'm doing, and I would very much put the emphasis on the word celebrity. When I was asked to do this, I did say to Neil Dixon that since he wasn't offering a fee, it was absolutely essential that we got a couple of characters, and we have got a couple of characters, believe me. And it's my great pleasure to introduce, I think probably the most visible North American music lawyer, certainly one of the most flamboyant, and a really nice guy, Alan Grubman. I feel a bit like Larry King. No notes. It's also the first time I've ever been introduced by Britain's Prime Minister. And I'm sure it's the first time Alan's been the warm-up act for Peter Grant. Okay, Alan, let's start. I was reading the dreaded book Hitmen this afternoon just to mock up a bit. And there was one particular phrase that caught my eye, which was, I think it was Paul Marshall, who said about you that you were a man of your time, and that was why you were successful. Do you think that's true? And if so, why?
Well, basically what happened in the music business during the 80s and now in the 90s is that there's been dramatic change. And I have always tried to deal with my career from the perspective that tomorrow is different than today. And what I tried to do during the 80s and early 90s is adjust to these dramatic changes. When I started in the record business, which was in 1970, 69 to be exact, it was a business that was run by individual entrepreneurs. There were some great characters in those days. There was a guy by the name of Morris Levy, and a man by the name of Henry Stone, and a man by the name of Neil Bogart, who passed away. And these fellas ran the companies that were really successful in those days. And over a period of 15 years, the record industry went from those cowboy entrepreneurs to major international corporations run by what we call now suits. Guys that wear very conservative suits, and they actually wear ties and jackets as probably a show of respect to them. I actually went upstairs, I put on a sport jacket, I changed my pants, dark shoes. Remember I was wearing different
You look good, Alan.
So I tried to...
Very Clint Eastwood, I might say.
You like that? So what I tried to do is adapt as the times changed. And I think that I've been successful in doing that, and that I was able to deal with those people as they existed then, and I've worked very hard in trying to deal with the industry as it exists today, which is totally and completely different, and something that artists really have a very sometimes difficult time understanding, because when they now have to meet the men who run their companies, they're meeting with people who are very different than the people they would have met 10 or 15 years ago. And one of the functions that a lawyer performs is he becomes a bridge, the bridge between the artist and the executive. And if you're able to do that, you're able to continue to function and succeed. And that's what I think I've done. There are other people who have also done it. So I think if that's a man of the
Do you
time.
see yourself acting in really in a legal role, or more in a sort of, I don't know, just bringing people together as well?
Well, you know, people think that lawyers just do lawyering per se. But in America, as opposed to England, I think, there are all kinds of specialties. And I think it works similar in Canada. There are real estate lawyers, there are matrimonial lawyers, there are corporate lawyers. And when you get into a specialty, after a while you develop a certain amount of relationships. And what you end up doing, in addition to doing your legal work, is you're constantly putting people together, deals together. So when you become successful in any specialty, you're doing much more than just being a lawyer. You're actually introducing people.
But you don't sit around doing the minutiae of contracts, for instance. I mean,
No, I've never been accused of that.
no.
God forbid.
I mean, there are other people, sort of.
Yes,
who do
yes.
all that.
As people say, you know, the real lawyers as opposed to Alan.
Yeah.
Yes.
How big's your practice now?
We now have about 23 real lawyers and 2 phony lawyers, me and another one, a partner of mine,
Right.
who like, you know. But basically, there's a very large amount of lawyers. You know, making the deal is basically the least time-consuming of a very complicated transaction. It really gets time-consuming after everybody has agreed, and now it has to be reduced to a document, which in the old days used to be 3 pages, and now we find it can be 100 pages.
At least.
At least.
At least.
And there's less said now in the 100 pages than used to be said in the 3 pages.
Would you characterize your firm as being the largest music practice in America, or going that way? Do you want it to be that?
It's the largest, the best, it's the most successful,
And the
it's
most expensive.
powerful, and we're also very humble.
Let's go back to the beginning of your life. Where were you born?
I was born in a manger in Brooklyn. Is this going to become a religious experience?
No. Well, you know, maybe we'll get to my room later. I should just say, Alan's wife is sitting in the front row, giving me the eye.
Brooklyn doesn't look like Bethlehem.
No, but okay. So you were born in Brooklyn.
Yes, Brooklyn, New York.
Tell me a little. Yeah, there's another one.
Yes, there's a Brookline, Massachusetts, but it's different than
But you
Brooklyn.
escaped.
Yeah. Some of the great people in the entertainment business, excluding myself, have come from Brooklyn. Don't ask me why. It seems to have been a very, very an area where very fertile for people attracted to the entertainment business, artists as well as business people. You know, Streisand and Neil Diamond came from Brooklyn. David Geffen came from Brooklyn. I mean, an enormous amount of people in the entertainment
You
industry.
didn't know those people at that.
No, we didn't,
childhood.
but it's very interesting. You know, I could say something funny, but I'll say
Go on,
something.
then.
I'll say something serious instead. Not serious, but interesting. No, none of us really knew each other. But the first time I met David Geffen, and it was an interesting story. Hall & Oates, which was an act that was very successful in the late 70s and 80s, was on RCA Records. And they were having great success, and their contract was just about coming up for renewal. And David Geffen, who most people know the name, had started a record company. I meant that seriously, but obviously it is sort of absurd. Of course you know who David Geffen is. Started a record company in 1980 called Geffen Records. And this was in the middle of 1980. I had never met him. Tommy Mottola, who was Hall & Oates' manager at that time, and I was the lawyer. Tommy is out in California, and he bumps into David Geffen. David says, "I'd do anything to have Hall & Oates. I'd do anything to have Hall & Oates." So he says, "Anything?" He says, "Anything." So he runs to the phone. He says, "Alan, Geffen will pay us a fortune for Hall & Oates." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "He'd give us anything." I said, "Very observant of you." Good. The next time I go out to I had never met David Geffen. The next time I go out to California, I call up David Geffen, and I go over to his house, and I'm sitting in the living room, had never met him. He walks into the living room. We look at each other, we sit down, Within 5 minutes, it was as if we had been friends for 30 years. Why? Because we were culturally identical. I lived in Brooklyn in this neighborhood, he lived in Brooklyn in that neighborhood, but it basically was the same. Our backgrounds were the same, our heritage was the same, and we immediately clicked. So the answer to your question is, I never met him, but spiritually, we knew each other. And you know, we just connected, and he looked at me. We spoke in shorthand from that day. And that's been an observation I've made over the years when I've met other guys who grew up in Brooklyn, whether it was a Neil Bogart, whether it was even a Barbra Streisand.
She's a guy?
No, not a guy. Well, no, she's not a guy. But, you know, there's a certain connection that you make.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is, we didn't know each other, but we did know each
Yeah,
other.
I must tell you now, it's tough being born in Leeds, England.
Who
Because
came from
nobody
Leeds?
came
Did anybody
from
ever
Leeds.
come from Leeds?
No. I had a
Who would
tough...
want to come from Leeds? Tell me about Leeds.
No, let's not.
No?
It's a bit like the Columbus, Ohio of England. But you wouldn't have
Don't
been to
tell me
Columbus,
about
Ohio.
Leeds. Don't tell me about Leeds.
Your
Okay,
parents,
good.
what was your father? What did he
My
do?
father was an immigrant. My father was born in Russia, came over here when he was about 11 years old. My mother was actually born in America. My father was in the garment center. If you were Jewish in those days, everybody was in the garment center. You had something to do with manufacturing clothing. And we had a very middle-class background.
Is that why your jacket has Grubman inside on the label?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, yeah.
And I grew up as I said, in Brooklyn, and had a very happy, very middle-level upbringing, and it was fun. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know anything worse. I didn't know anything better, and life was great.
And what attracted you to the legal profession?
Aha. I used to sing myself to sleep when I was a kid. I didn't realize it, but I used to sing myself to sleep every night.
Yeah, you were a soprano, weren't you, or something?
Yes. That was after I had the operation. Before that, I was
Yeah.
And my mother used to hear me sing, and one day she says, "You know, Alan, you have such a wonderful voice. There is a school in the neighborhood that you take singing lessons. I'd like you to go." I was like 8 years old at the time. So I said, okay. So my mother started taking me for singing lessons. At the age of 11, about 2 years later, there was a show on television in New York that used to be on every Sunday morning. It was a children's amateur show, but it was the same group every Sunday. And my mother, unbeknownst to me, got an audition for me. And I went, and they took me. And I became a performer on the show for 2 years, from the age of 11 to the age of 13. At the age of 13, my voice changed, and that was the end of my singing career. But what ended up happening is that, as I said, I came from a very middle-class area in Brooklyn. I had a very middle-class life. On the show, they would pick you. It was on Sunday morning at 10:30 in the morning, every Sunday. So every Saturday morning, they'd pick you up in a limousine. In Brooklyn, the only time you ever saw limousines was on the way to a funeral, because the family was in the back of the limousine. Other than that, you never knew from limousines. So they picked me up in a limousine. They take me to Rockefeller Center, where the rehearsals took place, and treated like a king. I had never been exposed to that. Then the next morning, they take you back and you go on the air. So they were fascinating weekends. But anyway, my voice changes and my career is over at the age of 13, and then we cut to 10 years later when I'm graduating law school. I remembered that in the entertainment business, everybody lived good. Everybody had money. So I said, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I might as well I might as well be a lawyer in the entertainment business than be a real estate lawyer in Brooklyn or whatever. So I went out and I got a job with a lawyer who was in the music business, and at that time, he represented the Beatles. This was in the late 70s. The Beatles had already broken up.
This was Walter Hoffer?
Walter Hoffer. And he had represented the Beatles, and...
No relation to Jimmy Hoffa?
No.
Different spelling.
He was much tougher than Jimmy. So that's how I got into it.
And
am I keeping you awake?
No, not at all. No. You know, sometimes I wonder why I do this stuff.
Do you know why we do it, Ed? Because we have fun.
Because we have the worldwide rights to this video.
We do.
Or at least I do.
Screwed again. Ed and I did this by accident in Manchester 2 years ago, and we really had a lot of fun. And Ed called me about a month ago, and he said, Alan, you know, I'm doing this thing in Toronto, and would you like to do that interview thing again? I said, sure. And so we're here. So that's why we do it.
This is how I get some free advice, actually. But
No,
we'll come to that. We'll come to that.
Don't push it.
What were you, when you joined this law firm, I mean, what were you actually doing there?
I was a young associate. You know, I did what all young associates do, whatever everybody else didn't want to do, you know, and in those days what you would do is I'd go through Billboard magazine and I'd have to find out if any songs were available for publishing overseas, because we had a lot of overseas clients, and I was actually drafting contracts in those days. And I did all those things that you do, but you know, I did that. I stayed with him from the end of 1969 to 74, and for some reason I adapted to the entertainment lawyering. So I started to do really well and started to get my own clients. And then in about 1970, in the middle of 74, I decided to go out on my own to start the firm, which is now the firm, but then it was me and
The firm.
The firm. Then it was me and a bridge table. Does everybody know what a bridge table is? These portable tables, you pull out the legs. That was my first desk, and a phone. And that was in 1970.
And who were these early clients? When you left, you presumably took some clients with you.
Well, there were 4 or 5. One was Henry Stone, who I mentioned, who had TK Records, which eventually became the Casey and the Sunshine Band and George McRae, a lot of you know, R&B stuff out of Florida. Then another client was Eileen Burns, she had a record company called Bang Records, which had, you know, some old masters in it. Then 2 gentlemen, Henry Bello and Jacques Morali, who were Frenchmen, who I met when they had a company in France, who moved to America, and their great success was the Village People. So there was them, and then there was a Brazilian client. There were about 4 or 5 clients. Oh, and Miles Copeland. Miles Copeland was one of the first. Miles Copeland,
Who I think I was actually working for at the time.
That's right.
Enough, yeah.
Miles Copeland is a manager who manages Sting and managed the Police and has a company called IRS Records, etc. He, of the 5 original clients, he was the survivor. Oh, and Delight Records, I forgot. Cool in the Gang.
Cool in the Gang, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was it.
You had a pretty interesting time with the Village People, didn't you?
He said to me before, you have to tell the Village People story. So this is the only part of the
So I'm leading
conversation
him
that's a setup.
pathetically into this
Yeah,
Village People story.
He loves this story. He absolutely loves this story. Okay, I'll tell this story.
I love things about guys who dress up in feathers.
Does everybody, well, they're sort of having a resurgence, but everybody knows who the Village People are, right? Okay. So they had this huge success between 77 and 80. Maybe less than that, 78 and 80. Towards the middle of 79, the producer of the act, which basically, a fellow by the name of Jacques Morali, who wrote the material, produced the material, did everything other than sing, said he couldn't deal any longer with the lead singer of the band. And it was either him or the lead singer, and it was obvious that it wasn't going to be him because he was the creative force. So the lead singer was a very violently prone person. That's an understatement. Somebody who you would have fear of physically. So I get a call from his partner, Henry Bello, who says, Alan, you must go out to California and fire so-and-so. I said, I have to go out to California? He said, well, yes, you have to. I said, why can't you go out to California? Well, I don't speak English. I said, you speak enough English. I'm not going out there unless you go out there. So we both go out there. This fella had temper tantrums and tendencies to be violent and all these things. So we check into this hotel, and we check in like at 12 o'clock, and the guy's going to show up at 4 o'clock, and we're very frightened. I said, Henry, this is crazy. This guy can kill us. God knows. I mean, this is nuts. What are we doing here? He says, Alan, we must do this. I said, oh, all right, all right. So it was the longest 4 hours of my life. The guy shows up, and as usual, I did the talking. I was trying to be diplomatic, and the guy was sitting there and seething, and I'm saying, oh, he's going to kill us. He's going to go. So finally, you know, after explaining to him for a half hour, he gets up and he storms out. So we're at Hotel A now in L.A. I said, Henry, let's get the hell out of here and go to another hotel. He's going to come back. He's going to come back. He says, you think so? I said, he's going to come back. He's going to kill us. So we start packing up to check out, and then there starts banging at the door. I said, I told you he's going to kill us. And he says, shh, we'll make like we're not here. And the banging continues and continues. I said, Henry, he ain't going away. He's not going away. He says, all right. I said, listen, he says, he takes a lamp, like a lamp, takes off the shade. He says, you open the door. If he comes in, I'll hit him over the head. I said, Henry, I don't need this, Henry. He says, well, what are we? I said, okay. So I count to 5. I open up the door, he's standing there, and it was room service. We had ordered drinks, and she knew there was somebody in the room, so she kept banging. And she didn't go away. And he looks and I look, and we close the door, and we literally run out of the hotel and go to another hotel. But it was probably one of the most frightening experiences of my life.
And
Who loves this story?
Yeah, well, you just, yeah, I've been in
So
situations
that's what happened.
like that. Yeah.
Yes.
So at this point you have a small practice, and one of your
Yes.
your current partners was with you.
Yes, I took with me an associate of mine whose name was Paul Schindler.
Right.
And he's been with me. Now the name of the firm is Grubman and Dursky, Schindler and Goldstein. So he came over with me, and I couldn't pay him, so I just I gave him the use of an office,
right.
and that's how we started. And then we got lucky with Henry Stone got connected with Casey and the Sunshine Band and George McRae within the first year, and then the beginning of the second year. Henry Bello and Jacques Morali connected first with, what's that song, Brazil, the Ritchie family in Brazil. And we really started humming, and things started building, and then another partner joined us a year later, Arthur and Dursky, and then between then and now, it just kept building. We kept hiring people, and then if they were really good, we'd make them a partner. And
is there any one client who came along during that period who you would consider a sort of catalyst for your success, that you started representing and that led to other people coming?
In the early 80s, and throughout the 70s, we were the king of disco at the time. Disco was the big thing. So we represented every record company that did disco music, and we represented an enormous amount of the disco artists at the time, but they weren't sustaining long-term superstars. In the early 80s, we started representing Bruce Springsteen, and then Madonna.
How did Bruce come about?
Bruce actually came about through a recommendation through David Geffen, actually.
To John Landau,
yeah, David Geffen was very friendly with John Landau, and the back piece of the Geffen story was that, so we ended up making a deal, Tommy and I ended up making a deal with Geffen for Hall & Oates. Not a deal, we shook hands. And then in the course of the next period of time, for some reason, the deal didn't work out, and Hall & Oates eventually went over to Arista Records. And for some reason, as I told you, David and I connected, really connected, and the way the dismembling of the Hall & Oates deal with David was done in a very civilized, gentlemanly fashion, where everybody, felt okay, and nobody felt that they did this and they did that. So I stayed very friendly with David, and then about a year later, he called me up and he said, I want you to be my lawyer. And I started...
You mean for him as an individual, or for...
For him as an individual on Geffen Records.
Right.
And then I started representing him in Geffen Records, and we became very close. Till this day, we've become very close friends. And he then said to John Landau in the early 80s, you've got to meet Alan Grubman, and you've got to blah, 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 blah. And I met him, and we started representing Bruce. And Bruce, I think, was probably the first really credible artist, as opposed to company, as opposed to artists that were here today and gone tomorrow. And then about a year later, Madonna came on the scene.
Now, how does that work? I mean, does Madonna ring you up, or what happens?
No, Madonna basically is managed by Freddie DeMann. And I would say 75% of the business contact is with Freddie and 25% is with Madonna. Madonna gives Freddie a lot of latitude in dealing with, but then we have to, we have to deal, when we have to deal in decisions, etc., Madonna's involved.
When you're in a situation like that, I mean, you've mentioned John Landau basically brings Bruce to you, and Freddie was instrumental, I presume, in bringing Madonna to you.
No, you know how we got Madonna?
It's probably through Seymour.
No. We were representing, and still do, a guy by the name of Jelly Bean Benitez.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Who was a
boyfriend.
Exactly. And we were representing him, and he called up and he said, I want you, she had just signed with Seymour Stein. I want you to meet my girlfriend. She has a record deal with Seymour Stein, Sire Records. And she came into the office, and we started representing her. And then I've always been friendly with Seymour, as you know, and Seymour calls me, Alan, she's going to be huge. She's going to be huge. And Seymour has, you can trust his judgment. He only said that to me on 400 other occasions. None of which happened.
No, but he does have great
Seymour probably has the classic ears of the record. I mean, I don't know if you people know who he is, but he's a genius. But he's very eccentric, but he's a total and complete genius.
He's barking
and
mad.
He was, and he was raving about it. To make a long story short, obviously
Hadn't he signed
right.
or something? She came to visit him in hospital?
Yes, he was having open heart surgery.
Right, at the time.
At the time. And he signed the contract with her from his hospital bed.
Yeah, so you had to basically get her out of this contract and get her into a better one straight away.
We didn't get her out, we just improved it.
Yeah, a titch.
A titch.
Yeah.
So that, and then from those people came John Cougar Mellencamp and Sting, and then
Do these people basically approach you?
Yes. In America, it is not ethical, except in your case, as I speak to you later about Dire Straits. But it's not ethical to approach somebody and say, can I represent you? You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to wait to be recommended. So basically what we do is people now...
I get hit on by lawyers all the time.
In America?
But not by you, Alan, but yeah. I mean, I'm surprised by what you're saying, actually. I didn't know that was the
actually,
case.
you're not supposed to.
Yeah, I was
if you want to get around it, I don't know if you're approached directly. What they should do is have a friend of theirs tell her, like what David did on behalf of me with Springsteen. In that case, I didn't know, but I could have said, David, call up...
Right.
I mean, that happens often, but a lawyer
I usually
is not
get the
supposed to
receptionist calling me.
We're saying high level.
Yeah, high level.
High level.
We start there.
Right.
But the point I was going to make about John Landau and Bruce was that John brought Bruce to you, but you presumably don't act for John.
No. How it works is that we act for both parties, in a sense, because Bruce's interest is John's interest
synonymous.
is Bruce's. Except when Bruce and John are negotiating their deal.
Their management terms.
Then we step out, and they each have
it's
their
interesting
own
you say that,
representation.
because of course one of the things that crops up, particularly at conferences like this, it gets mentioned, is the whole conflict of interest thing within the music
Never
legal
heard that
music
said
legal
before.
profession.
Conflict of interest.
I'll
That's
keep
right.
going, Alan.
That's right. Keep going.
And it's because, and people seem to think this is something specific, I think, to the United States. Now, for instance, in the UK, Dire Straits don't have a lawyer of their own choosing. God, your eyes have gone wide. They use my lawyer. But when we're doing a management agreement, when we do them, I then have to butt out and get somebody else, or do it myself, which is what I do.
Exactly.
In fact. So you're talking about a parallel situation.
Yes,
really.
because then there isn't a mutuality of interest, and then if you're representing both sides in the same transaction, that gets a little too hairy. You can't do that.
Let me ask you a very hypothetical question. If a young manager comes to you with a hot act, for you to represent the act, and it's your perception that this manager is utterly and totally incompetent, and he's probably going to damage the act's career, what, if anything, would you do about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I can't remember that ever happening, but that would be a real dilemma, because if I knew that this manager was hurting the artist's career, and I said nothing, I would be breaching a duty I have to the artist. Probably what I would do, I'd probably not get involved at all. I'd wait for the manager to get fired, and then I'd go and represent the act. But I really, I would have a difficult time. You know, I couldn't do that.
Now, with these major names we're talking about, when you're doing things for them, do they physically come into the office? I mean, do you sit there, or does it vary from client to client, or do you deal with the manager, or how does that work?
Okay.
I mean, does Madonna come to meetings?
Yes. Madonna comes to the office, Bruce comes to the office, Sting comes to the office, all the, you know, Mariah Carey will come, Michael Bolton will come, but it isn't on a regular basis. In other words, most of the time, you know, there's a certain deference we all have to talent, because at the end of the day, we can all be the biggest genius. You could be the biggest genius manager. I could be the most brilliant lawyer. He could be the most brilliant accountant. The talent is what makes things happen. So there's a respect that we all must and should give to the artists, because they deserve it. So if I have to have a meeting with an artist, I will always say, where would you like to get together? And if they say, well, can you come over to the apartment, or I will always do that. But there are times when it makes sense that they'll come into the office, either because they're in town, or sometimes they just want to come into the office. So,
do you find with the generation of artists you're dealing with that they have a pretty good idea of not only where they're going creatively, but how they want their business side to sort of fit round it?
The really, really successful, sustaining artists, as the years go on, they get very, very smart. Not very smart, they get very knowledgeable on the business end of their careers. You know, whether it's Mick Jagger, or it's any artist you want to name that's really been around, and Elton John. I'm talking about artists that I have nothing to do with. These artists, as well as the artists that I represent, become very, very savvy and know the business side, because they've been doing it for 20, 25 years.
Do you think that's a good thing, or is it sometimes a hindrance?
No, I think it's a very good thing, because it's always better to deal with intelligent, knowledgeable clients than unintelligent clients who have no knowledge. The most dangerous people in the world to deal with are people who don't know what the hell is going on.
Because they have little knowledge.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, because people who don't have knowledge sometimes say stupid things, ask stupid things, want you to do stupid things for them. So I always prefer representing somebody knowledgeable than not knowledgeable.
You and I, I'm sure, have
We were
both...
talking about this before.
Yeah.
We were actually, we had lunch before, we were talking about the fact that like Dire Straits and artists who have been around, who really have their feet on the ground and really have a grasp of their career and themselves and have their ego intact, are so much more pleasurable to deal with than when you're dealing with an artist that comes out of nowhere and has huge success overnight and doesn't know which end is up, doesn't know how to cope, is afraid, is paranoid, is insecure, and you can't deal with the person. And what very often happens is they burn out.
Have you ever either chosen not to represent somebody or dropped somebody because of what I would call perverseness? I don't mean sexually perverse, Alan, but you know what I mean, the artist who is just...
It takes an awful lot
to get you to drop.
to get us to drop a client, especially a successful one, but there have been a couple of occasions, because then you wake up one day and you look in the mirror and you say, life is too short. Yeah. But it takes an awful lot, because in the field we're dealing with, to begin with, we're dealing with people that are very unique in their personalities and their temperaments, or else they wouldn't be in this business. So where you draw the line is usually on a much different level than if we were in the concrete business, or we were in the widget business.
Is there any particular reason you've never got into management? I'm sure it must be.
Yeah, it's a very simple reason. If I went into management, I would start competing with my clients. And if you're a client of mine, you're a manager client of mine, and you know that I'm managing an act, you don't want your lawyer in the same business.
What I actually meant outside of the practice, I meant give up your practice.
No.
And nobody's ever appealed to you that much, or you?
No, because it's too dangerous. we have 1,000 clients, right? If I got fired by 1, by 10, who cares? You know, it has no impact on my life, right? If I have one client, right, hypothetically, you manage one client, John Landau manages one client, and God forbid something happens to that client, you're in the shit.
Well, yes, but I mean,
So
we're
there's
both
much more security in representing. Now, you can't do that as a manager because management is such a highly personalized area. You can't give the service that you're giving to Dire Straits to 5 people. You can't do it. There isn't enough time in the day. But a lawyer's services are much more specific and much more limited. So we can service many, many more clients than a manager. So I sleep better at night knowing I have 1,000 people that have to fire me as opposed to 1 or 2. I'm not trying to depress you, but
No. I'm fairly confident.
he's going to run out of here and go call Dire Straits. Is everything okay? Is everything okay?
No, they don't accept collect calls.
Touche.
Touche.
Very good.
Right. You've thrown me.
He's nervous. He's nervous.
No, I'm not.
He's thinking. Oh,
I am thinking, yeah. No, the reason I asked the question is because I've asked that of quite a number of English attorneys, and they've always said it's because they couldn't deal with the phone call in the middle of the night. You've given a different side of that, but...
Well, I get phone calls, I mean, not as much as I used to, but I get just as many phone calls in the middle of the night as a manager. Maybe not as insane, but you get the phone call. No, I don't think that's it.
Do you prefer dealing with artist talent or record company executives or labels? I mean, do you have a preference?
It depends upon the individual. You know, I don't pick a category who I prefer to deal with. I pick the person I prefer to deal with. There are times that I really love dealing with an artist, and there are times I really like dealing with an executive, and then there are times that I can't deal with that executive, and this artist is driving me crazy. So it's really based upon the individual. There's no hard and fast rule.
As we move towards apparently the digitalization of life itself, I mean,
I like that. That was pretty good, right? Could you repeat that?
The digitalization of life itself.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yes.
Digital vibrators. I mean, I'd find it, all this stuff, I mean, I was doing a panel today and I actually said as a joke, can somebody tell me what CD-ROM is? But it's not a joke. Do you find that you're having to sort of learn this stuff almost from the bottom up?
Absolutely. I mean, I am totally non-mechanical, you know, like... A couple of weeks ago, I was in Mickey Schulhoff's office. Mickey is the chairman of Sony Corporation, and he wanted me to see a video. Now, this is the guy who's the chairman of. He didn't know how to put the television on.
Yeah.
We were sitting there, and he's pushing the buttons, and he's calling his secretary. He had to have maintenance come up to put on the video. I said, "Aren't you a physicist?" He said, "Yeah, Alan." I said, "Oh, I was just checking." So, yeah,
No, I mean,
none of us...
I have never, I'm 45 years old, I have never recorded anything off a TV set. I don't know how it works. And I'm now down to the things that have 3 buttons, on, off, and pause, and I still can't. And I think it's a sort of generational thing,
Yeah.
I find.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, do you savor the future in the sense that we're digitalizing everything? Or is it, you don't worry
I really
about
don't think about it. Take every day, you know, as I said to you at the beginning, as I try to adapt to tomorrow. If tomorrow is CD-ROM, you and I will learn about CD-ROM. If we don't have to learn about CD-ROM, we're not going to, in our spare time, read up on CD-ROM. How's that sound?
That sounds
pretty accurate?
Pretty accurate, yeah. Well, it certainly is for me. But I mean, I'm not... it's not something that I mean, I would love to get back to the days of the 7-inch vinyl single with a hole in the middle in a plain brown bag that's round. I mean, that was a very sort of simple time.
Well, that was
to
the
me.
record business.
Yeah, and we're not really in the record business
Yeah,
anymore.
we're in the audio business.
When I mean, most of certainly the major companies at the moment are starting to introduce incredibly wide and vague clauses covering all this stuff.
Right.
And when you see these clauses about stuff that hasn't been invented yet and may be invented and is possibly going to take place on Pluto or Jupiter at some point in the future, how do you? I mean, do you try and get those things sort of struck out of agreements?
Yeah,
or
what we do is just say no. We are not going to work out arrangements for technologies that aren't in existence yet, or we don't know how it's going to work. We just will say in the contract, we will in good faith sit down at that time and work out whatever is right. You can't agree to royalty provisions based upon technologies that don't exist yet. The record companies have a big problem because their concern is that if this new configuration becomes dominant, and they have a recording artist agreement with a superstar, and this configuration now is not covered in the contract, they can basically lose the artist. So you have to work out an accommodation that where they won't lose the artist, but we will in good faith negotiate it, and then if you can't work it out, there's arbitration and all that.
Now, I don't know whether it's happening in the US, but as I know you know, there's a lot of legal activity and government type of activity around the industry, particularly in the UK. And I think there are a few issues coming up here in Canada. We were talking about the public performance issue this morning at the managers thing. Do you think that, you know, as we move on through time, that the way that the record deals are currently done will have to, they'll have to sort of pull back from the, you know, the 8 or 12 album deal and ownership of copyrights and masters for life and packaging deductions on things that don't have packages and so on?
There's a real pattern, at least this is now my 24th year. There is a pattern that I've watched over the 24 years, which is that the artists become more dominant in dealing with their record companies, and they end up getting a bigger and bigger and bigger piece of the pie. When I started, artists were getting royalties of 5%, 6%. Now artists are getting royalties 4 and 5 times that amount. So as time goes by, the contracts will become more and more favorable to the artists, which could include shorter-term contracts, which I think is inevitable. Not to the extent that certain people would like. You can't have a contract for 2 or 3 albums. And I'll explain to you the reason. It's a very simple reason. Artists sometimes take 2 or 3 albums to break. If a record company only has an artist for 3 albums, the 3 albums happen, they break, and then they leave. That doesn't work for the record company. But these 8 album deals, I think that you're going to find that contracts start coming down to the 4 and 5 range. I think that's what's going to happen.
And presumably for some superstar acts, once their deal's up, you might see, I mean,
one album,
let's just take Dire Straits as a random example. You might see a 1 album at a time type of arrangement. I mean, I'm not sure actually as a manager I think that's a very good idea, but you might see that happening.
Well, now you're getting into negotiating. I don't think you'll ever see one-off albums because the record companies are not going to want to put in whatever they have to put in just for the 1 album. But I could see happening is that they'll make, like, for a superstar who's free, a 2-album deal. However, if the first album doesn't meet certain sales criteria, then you would have the right to not have to deliver the second album.
Right.
That I could see happening.
So it would almost be an option on the artist's side.
If that's right, if there isn't a certain level of success.
Right.
You like that one? I just
That's
thought about
quite
that.
an interesting.
That's pretty interesting,
thing
right?
You just thought that up.
Just thought that up. Looking at your face, I just thought that up. You inspire me, Ed.
Yes,
But there'll never be like in the movie business where every movie stands on its own. It won't. I don't believe it'll ever happen. The economics don't work.
Do you think it might happen in publishing?
Yes, because publishing is a banking function. Yes, it could happen because publishers don't make huge investments in marketing and building images. You know,
They don't make any.
that's right. They give you an advance, and they hope the record company is going to have a big hit, and then they collect their money and take their piece. Yeah.
There's been over the last 10 years a contraction in the number of majors, record companies out there. We're down now to about, what, 5.5, 6, something
Not
like
a
that?
contraction of the majors, a contraction of companies.
Well, yes.
The majors are still there, but all the other little companies have been acquired by the majors.
Do you think that though that of these 6 majors, we will actually in the next few years perhaps see even less than that number?
No. No, because of this, there are 6 majors. Sony Music is never going to go away. Warner's is never going to go away. Thorny EMI might change its configuration. In other words, it might be acquired, or it might acquire a movie company and merge into something bigger, but it'll always be a major record company. Bertelsmann, that is number 4. Polygram. These companies are here to stay. No, they're never going to go away. So you're never going to see a contraction. And they can't merge. In other words, 2 of these companies can't merge, at least in America, because it's antitrust. They would have too much of them. So they cannot merge anymore. The majors can't merge, and they're not going to go away. So you'll always have those 6 companies.
Okay, but do you think then that there is a possibility that they might be purchased by other parties, for instance, telephone companies?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in other words, like what's happening right now in the superhighway. Yes, it's possible that these companies will merge with other companies, not in the record business.
Yeah.
Like Sony, it's rumored that Sony would entertain an offer by a synergistic company, not a record company, but a telephone company, a cable company, to buy a minority interest in Sony Pictures and Sony Music. That's a rumor.
Do you think that's dangerous for music, or a good thing? Or?
Just to consider, it's really bringing the next level of distribution. Why would these companies be interested in why is Paramount or Time Warner, why are they all interested in doing stuff with telephone companies? Because the next level of distribution is through cable and
fiber optic.
And fiber optic. So no, it's just taking the distribution system to the 21st century.
Do you listen to music?
Not very often.
Do you like
you
it?
knew I was going to give it.
Do you think
this is pretty well known. I am not a great lover of contemporary music. My favorite artists are people like Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole. So, when I'm relaxing at home, I am not usually listening to contemporary music. But I still love all my clients, and they're wonderful people, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I'm not, I do not, I think I've been in a recording studio in the last quarter of a century. I can count it on my fingers. That's, by the way, and I think in a way that has been a real asset to the building.
I was going to say, I don't know if it would even be a virtue.
It is a virtue because people come to me to be their lawyer, to give them business advice, legal advice. They don't want a groupie. They don't want somebody who says, oh, I love your music. Can I come to the studio? Can I come to your concerts and sit? They don't want that. They want somebody who's going to take care of their business. And they know that that's what I'm interested in doing. I'll get invited to a concert, etc. Of course, if I'm in town and available, I'll go. But it isn't something that, I'm not a music junkie or a music groupie. And I think clients over the years have gotten off on that because they say, Alan's function in my life is this. I don't need him in my studio. Yeah, that's right. I don't need him on the tour bus. I don't need him in the studio. I want him taking care of my business. So what started off as sort of, will people really understand, turned out to be a virtue. And everybody knows it. It's not like a secret. So,
Yeah, it's interesting actually because there was a time historically where my band let a particular lawyer go precisely because he wanted to go on the tour bus.
Oh,
and
God.
we could never get him out of the bunk where he was invariably doing something unnatural.
One time years ago, John Cougar Mellencamp forced me, almost at gunpoint, to go to Farm Aid.
Oh.
You gotta come to Farm Aid, Al. It was like the first one. And I experienced what it was like for 24 hours to be on the road with a rock band. The single worst experience I ever felt. With,
You were obviously with the wrong band. I mean, it
well,
doesn't
I might have been, but like with the trailers and the lousy food and that's a tough gig.
If you weren't doing what you're doing and you were still in music, what would you like to be doing?
If I wasn't doing... If I couldn't be a lawyer in the music business, what would I want to do? At this point in my life, probably be involved with a major company in the music business.
Yes.
Yes.
By which you mean a major record company?
Right. That's right.
A Sony or somebody like that?
Yes, one of the big companies. I would do that.
I mean, presumably you get pitched occasionally. People, I mean, it happens. I mean, we see people in your situation becoming heads of labels. Does this happen occasionally?
Well, if it happened,
Let me press you.
If it happened hypothetically, it would be a problem for me because of this firm that I built. You know, it's like a family. The firm. I don't want to sound like but the truth of the matter is, like, I have an obligation to everybody there, and if I just got up and left, you know, it would be hurting a lot of people. But if the offer was right, screw them. No. So I mean, it's a more difficult decision than you would think it would be.
No, it's happened to me as well. I mean, you get, you know, and I have the same feeling. There's a loyalty thing there. I think,
you know, like
particularly
listen,
after the number of
if you
years.
were offered a job in a company, a major job, how do you go over to Dire Straits, who you've been with for 15, 20 years, and say, listen, I'm leaving? It's tough. It's tough. It would be a tough thing for you to do.
Absolutely, yes, and I've so far not felt inclined to do that.
Right.
We were talking about something over lunch, which I thought was quite interesting, was something you mentioned, which was this sort of, and this is a contraction situation, the contraction of the number of music law firms in the States at the moment, and your theory as to why that was or is.
It seems like even though the record business and the music business keeps growing and growing, the amount of lawyers in it keeps shrinking and shrinking. And the reason is that the record companies have become such huge institutions that they're in constant need of really good people. So as soon as there's a young lawyer who starts to really show that they're smart and aggressive and on the ball, they are hired by the record companies. Years ago, the really, really big money was in being a manager, being a lawyer, and the record company executives earned basically modest salaries. What has happened now is that the record company executives are making large amounts of money. So these young lawyers now are very attracted to going into a company. And there are several in America we discussed. Michelle Anthony, one of my former partners, Bob Flax, went in to basically be the #2 guy at EMI Music. Peter Paterno went to become president.
Hollywood,
And they're attracted to that because supposedly it's an easier life. You know, you don't have the pressures and blah, blah, blah. Supposedly that's what they say. But yeah, the amount of lawyers is shrinking. Yeah.
I also have noticed that...
Which I love, by the way.
Absolutely.
I have no problem with that.
You've got a pretty big piece of the pie, haven't you, in terms of market share, if you like.
Yeah,
Have you ever figured out your market share, Alan?
Yes, I do it all the time. I used to do it more years ago. I don't do it as much, but I used to look at the top 100 charts and see how many records we represented. And the last time I used to do it, which is 2-3 years ago, we always used to have between 30 and 40 records a week. We either represented the artist or the producer or the company, etc. We had a pretty good market share.
There's another trend I don't know if it's a trend, but it's certainly the case that there are now several of these major record companies which are basically being run by ex-artist managers. David Geffen,
Really?
Irving Azoff, Tommy. But do you see that as a continuing trend? I'm not angling for anything here. Or
He's definitely looking for a job. You
no,
see
I'm not looking for a
This
job.
guy is looking for a gig. Well, the only trend I actually see is
I could do your PR,
English
I guess.
managers who are based out of London who have premature gray hair. That's the prototype of what they're looking for.
Grecian
the answer
2000
to your-
is shit.
What's that?
That Grecian 2000 is shit.
The answer to your question is yes, because bright managers are perfect to run or be involved in major record companies because they have a business knowledge and they have a talent knowledge.
Do you think better at it than maybe accountants or lawyers, or does it just depend
Yes.
on individuals?
No, I think that a really top-rate, first-rate manager has the talents that are most conducive to being a major executive in a record company. Yeah, because they have to cross that bridge more often than lawyers and accountants in dealing with the creative side and the business side. They have to be able to do both. So they're perfect. for
Somebody
running
who
companies.
seemed to do both and who you had a very, long relationship was Walter Yetnikoff,
Yes,
who seemed to have all of these sort of ingredients.
Yes.
What's he up to now?
well, he's been out of Sony for 3.5 years, and he wants to get into the movie business, and he's developing properties. He might be doing the Miles Davis story.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a person that had both those talents. He was able to relate to artists and was able to understand. Well, he was a lawyer.
No, I know.
But he also had a good feel for artists.
You still in touch? You still friends?
Not that often, but we see each other and we speak.
Have you ever wanted to get into the movie end of things?
When I was a kid, not anymore. The movie business is it takes too long to see a project through. The record business, from the time you sign till the time it's out, could be 6 months, a year. A movie can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you find out in a weekend. See, the movie.
So presumably it takes that much longer to get paid.
No, because the financial structure of the movie business is very different. Most people in the movie business, outside people like us, don't really make money from movies, from the success of the movie. They get their fees.
The fees, that's a fee base.
Very few, except the superstars, the Spielbergs, the Brian De Palmas, they really make money on the back end. But most movie producers get a fee for doing the movie, and then they get net points.
Yeah.
And they never see the net points.
Yeah.
So it's, for some reason, the movie business is very, very glamorous. It'll always be very glamorous. But the record business, in terms of profits and in terms of volume, is a much larger industry than the movie industry. I don't know if you're aware.
No, I'm aware. You mean worldwide?
Worldwide, the record companies make substantially more profits and do substantially more business than the movie companies. But there's that glamour aspect of the movie companies that never seems to go away. The relationship between the artist and the record company is the artist gets X percentage of the pie and the record company gets X percentage of the pie. The record companies are going to try to keep the largest piece of the pie that they can, and the artists are going to try to get the largest piece. So it isn't like if you take $1 away from the record company, if you give the artist $1 more, that means the record companies make you $1 less. So they have a vested interest in trying to keep the artist at the lowest rates possible. Because, a record sells for $9, wholesale $6.50.
Not in the UK.
Well, whatever it is. But in America, it's $6.50. There's only $6.50 there to split up.
Right.
So if the artist gets more, the record company gets less. But as I said, that's changing. The artist has much more control than
Do you think the artist has got too much control? Are we getting to that point?
Well, certain artists have too much control. Others don't. Once you reach a certain level, the artist does their record and delivers the record to the record company, and the record company says, "Thank you, I love you." They have nothing to say about it. And if the record's a great success, the record company is delighted. If the record stiffs, then the record company says, "Well, we have to have more control." And then the artist says, "I don't want you to have more control." So the bottom line is that the control factor really is only an issue when a major artist starts to lose his or her popularity. Beginning artists have less control. They don't have total control. They have to work with the record company.
You've got a very interesting philosophy about billing.
I mean, getting paid.
Getting paid and what you charge. Would you
Yes.
like to elaborate?
This is another setup question.
And it's going to fail miserably, I can tell.
My firm does not work on an hourly rate, and we don't work on a percentage basis.
It's a minute rate, isn't it?
In your case, it'll be a second rate. So we don't really do that because we don't believe a percentage is fair, because then we're partners with the client, and that's not what lawyers are supposed to be. So I created something years ago called instinctive billing, which goes something like this. This is, by the way, when we're doing a deal for a renegotiation for an artist, we're selling a company, not when we do day-to-day legal work. Then it's done on a monthly retainer. But let's say Mariah Carey, we're now going to redo her.
You did her prenuptial agreement.
Right. I didn't do that on a percentage basis.
Thank you.
What we do is, after the deal's done and everything is signed, sealed, and delivered, then I sit down with the client and I say, "Okay, so what are we going to charge moi?" And basically, the reason for that is when you sit down with somebody at the beginning and you say, "I want X dollars," no matter what it is, they say, "What? How much? God." When you do it after the fact, after they've gotten these truckloads of money, they're much more amenable to
Giving you
pay
one of the
you-
trucks.
Giving us one of the trucks. And I'll keep the contents
knew you
of
were
the
a
truck, and I'm going to
teamster.
give you the truck. So that's what we do. So there's really no, cut and dry rule. But it's worked.
Seymour Stein once told me that when you come up with this philosophy, you also hand out smelling salts at the same time.
No, just to him.
Just to him.
Just to him. Seymour is a little tight with the El Bucko.
No, really?
I'm sure this comes as a great shock to you.
Yeah.
But that's how we do it. And most law firms do things on a much more traditional basis. But we don't do anything on a traditional basis. It would be boring to do things on a traditional basis. I'd be a negligence lawyer if I did things in a traditional way, right?
Yeah.
You know what a negligence lawyer is.
Absolutely, yes.
Just
I'm
check.
always looking for negligence. You probably, I mean, this is possibly
papers
ego
do you
on
have?
your... Sorry?
What papers do you have in you? You're on stage. You don't have papers,
This
do you?
is... I have to present some awards tonight. This is
Oh,
to
okay.
tell me what time, what awards, and what to say.
Just checking. Continue. You're on a
You'll
roll.
be at the
You're on a roll.
in-laws. You'll be at the in-laws eating
Yes.
meatloaf.
No.
Not the artist.
What is it, potted chicken?
What did you
My wife's parents live in Toronto.
Yeah.
And that
But
was...
she escaped.
And she escaped, right. So we're going to have dinner at her parents' house tonight.
I've completely forgotten what I was going to ask you now.
Would you like to come to dinner with us? You'll love it.
I have to do this, Alan. That's
You'll
very
get a little
kind of you.
indigestion,
Yeah.
but you'll love it.
Since I've completely forgotten what I was going to ask after that exchange, Alan did agree very kindly to take a few questions from the floor, and I think we have a roving microphone, and we also have some microphones down the middle. And does anybody here have anything to ask this gentleman? Yeah, could you just say your name so we...
Christopher Jones. I'm curious, you talked about contracts and the duration. I wonder, Alan, do you have an opinion about the George Michael case in London right now? And how will predict an outcome?
I'll cut you short on that one because I was involved in one of the renegotiations of George Michael. So that precludes me from sitting here and discussing it because I represented George at a certain point in time. So I couldn't comment on it.
You're wanting to know
But he
what-
can.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Seriously, he'll answer the question.
What impact do you think, how do you think it's going to turn out, and how will that impact on the business in general?
I think irrespective of who wins the current case as it's proceeding in the UK, it's simply the first round. George has said that he will not record another note of music for Sony. So if he were to lose, he's got one or two choices, basically to give up having a music career, unless he wants to be a producer or a songwriter, or to appeal it. And he could appeal it to the House of Lords in the UK, and depending on what happened there, he could appeal to the European Court, upon which a lot of the legal stuff that he's based his case on is European law. And I was saying earlier today at the managers' thing, the UK is being brought into line with a lot of European law at the moment, and it's based on restraint of trade, and he wants to get his masters back, and so on and so forth. Of course, the problem in all of this, from George Michael's point of view, is cost, and he's put his career on hold. And I think that's probably the biggest danger for him. The other thing, of course, is he is perceived to be a very successful artist. It's different in that sense from the Stone Roses and Holly Johnson cases, which happened in the UK some years ago, where the judge found that in both cases the contract was unenforceable because it was the terms of it were totally absurd. They were so far lopsided in favour of the two record companies, which incidentally were both small independent type labels. I think as a matter of law he could well win, but he's done very well out of the deal from the point of view of your average working person, and that may well influence the judgment. I don't think, incidentally, and I think this is just a general matter of law which Alan probably would comment on, it wouldn't be right to think that this is instantly going to change everybody's contracts. That would happen entirely on a case-by-case basis. Now, it might well be the case that some of the record companies anticipate, well, some of them are already anticipating this, and they're starting to volunteer changes in certain elements of their agreements, which are more favourable to the act, if you like. And I think, as Alan said earlier, that the day of the 12-album deal is probably truly over. That is, the exclusivity on that is very restrictive. But it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, overnight, we'll all have different record agreements. If, for instance, I wanted to change mine, I might well be able to use the judgment as an element in my argument, but I would have to fight it on the basis of our particular agreement. And in my case, we've managed to get around about 97.5% of the things he's moaning about, because I'm brilliant.
And very modest.
We're both modest, Alan.
Yes, we don't suffer from modesty.
Another question? There must be another question. Alan flew up here economy for this. No? Oh, good.
Think of a story of any deal you could share with us that you wish you hadn't made or that didn't go the way you wanted it to. Even broadly speaking.
I can't give the name, but the worst deal I ever made is I sold a record company a small record company to a major, and the price at the time was $3 million. This was a long time ago. And the way the acquiring company structured the deal is they did it on the basis of like recouping the $3 million, then it would be successful. And I remember that of the $3 million that they paid, they recouped $14,000. I wasn't very happy, and the president of the company, put a contract out of my life. That was like terrible. But I wasn't that crazy about the guy, so screw him. But the truth of the matter is that was the worst. What you don't want to do if you're in the deal-making business is make deals where people really get hurt. Because then when you come back, they say, oh, I remember the last time. Out of here. So that's not what you want to see happen. But that was the worst deal I ever made.
How do you know when you've made a good deal?
It's called hit records. When you have hit records, everybody's happy. When you have stiff records, one party's happy, the guy who got the money. That's really a serious answer. In other words, a good deal, in the broad scheme of things, is when the deals work out. Because that also gives you the ability to go back and do it again, to renegotiate, as we say. But when a company pays you a lot of money for an artist and the records don't sell, it's like depressing.
When you're making a major deal for a big artist, let's say, or a renegotiation, do you principally look at the advance structure and the royalty, or do you try and tinker with things like packaging deductions or get quarterly accounting or reserve funds and all this sort of stuff?
Well, it depends upon the agenda of the artist. I've always been a firm believer in the first two premises, which is the advances and the royalties. There was a case of a deal I did a couple of years ago where there was such total belief in the artist that the advances we made a totally secondary issue, and we went for historic royalties. And we accomplished it. But we were betting that artist was going to be successful for the next 15 years. But basically, there has to be a balance between, you can never compromise the artist's royalty to get a bigger advance, especially if the artist is successful, because then you're being foolish, because you're being very short-sighted.
Well, you're just giving them their own money earlier.
Right. So the name of the game is to get killer royalties and killer advances, and then you've done your job. The other stuff, whether it's packaging deductions, artwork costs, there are a whole slew. I say that with a certain amount of ignorance, because those are the issues that I don't deal with anymore. In other words, after I've done the ownership of the masters, the royalties, the advances, the term, then when those issues are resolved, then I hand it over to one of my partners who chew up those other points. They're all important. I mean, the record business today is so sophisticated and the money is so big that a packaging deduction of a couple of points, instead of a 15% packaging deduction, a 13%, or whatever, can amount to a hell of a lot of money, because now, a successful record can sell 10 million, 15 million, 5 million. The numbers are so large that those percentages are very important. I personally deal with a certain group of issues, and then the other guys deal with the rest, but they're all important. It's not the old days where the only thing that a lawyer looked at was the advance paragraph. And if that was okay, nothing else mattered.
Do you think it's true that, I mean, there is a philosophy that if you can get the record company into a corner by getting humongous advances, in other words, to sort of put them in a debt position,
Right.
that they will work harder for you to get themselves out of the
You know
debt?
something, it's simplistic, but there is a certain amount of truth. If they have a huge amount of money on the line, they will pay more attention. But usually, where you get really huge amounts of money, it's because the stars are very huge to begin with, and I don't know if you need that extra pressure. Because, you know, a record company's stock and trade are their superstars. If they start screwing up their superstars and not selling the proper amount of records, the new artists that they want to sign are not going to want to sign with them. They're going to want to sign with the other company who's selling a
I
lot.
mean, we've been talking mostly about record companies this afternoon,
Yeah.
but do you personally do things like merchandising deals or?
Well, the firm does. What I personally do now is I would say, I deal with the superstars, which must be 25% of my time. And 75% of my time, I'm dealing with company matters, whether it's selling companies or representing executives or buying companies on behalf of clients or doing sophisticated distribution deals. I've been doing more and more pure corporate stuff over the last few years. It started in the late 80s when I started selling the Chrysalises and the Geffens, etc. But the firm, as I said, with those 25
I can't help but keep
people,
thinking of the movie every time you call it The Firm.
the firm, right, the guys. You know, we have 2 or 3 guys that just do merchandising. We have guys that do publishing. And of course, the video is a very active area. But I personally spend most of my time on the major artists and the company transactions.
Okay. We're drawing to a close, I think. Any more questions? A couple of questions? Yes. This gentleman down here.
Yes, I wonder, you talk about renegotiating after a new artist has had a hit. What can you not renegotiate? What should you make sure you absolutely get up front?
When you go into renegotiate, there's nothing you cannot get. You have to work under the premise that you want everything.
So it's a completely clean slate.
Yes, yes. Because remember, renegotiating only is motivated by successful sales. The amount of artists who sell records is so few that the record companies have been conditioned, to some extent, hopefully by me, that when there's an artist that has been successful, you go for everything across the board.
How big a hit would it have to be to get them to give you it?
Well, you can't quantify it in terms of numbers of records, but everybody knows when a new artist is doing well. You know, it's apparent to everybody. 9 Inch Nails, we represent Interscope Records. 9 Inch Nails is very successful. Their record's out a week, and everybody knows this is going to be a big record. It's not, you know. So it's intangible, but you know what's happening, and you know what's not happening. You can't quantify, but it's there. Two more questions. Are there 2 more questions?
Yeah, there's a hand that went up over here somewhere.
Actually, his second question was my question, so you move on.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, I'm trying. We represent a couple of Canadian artists, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that because I don't personally handle them. The last Canadian artist that I was very involved with years ago, very, very nice guys, Triumph. In fact, they live in Toronto. But the firm represents a few Canadian artists, some young artists, etc. We're not adverse to representing Canadian artists, if that's your question.
One more. Anybody?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Does Mr. Grubman have a comment on the 2 Live Crew decision?
No, not really. No, I don't.
It's funny, I just bought that for my 14-year-old daughter because it's banned in England, and she absolutely insisted that I came back to England with a 2 Live Crew album.
And tell them what happened when you read the...
Well, it's funny, I went into a store and I pulled the thing out the rack and I turn it over and everything starts with fuck and suck. And I think, I can't give this to her. Are we on TV, by the way? Then I thought, when I asked my parents to get me Heartbreak Hotel, I had the same thing, so I bought it.
I just want to say one thing. I think Ed has done a very effective job at asking the right questions, and I want to thank him.
Thank you,
very
Alan.
much.
Thanks. Just before we finish, have you got any just final thoughts about life in music and...
My final thoughts would be that if you have to make a living in life, it's fabulous if you can do that in a business that you love. And obviously everybody here is in the music business who would like to get into it, and it's a great way of spending your life. It's exciting, it's challenging, and you really have an impact on mankind. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I don't think God ever created a human being that doesn't listen to some form of music. So you're reaching literally the entire world, and it gives you the clear feeling that you're doing something worthwhile. And at the same time, if you do it well, you make a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you.